It's interesting. I've been having this conversation a lot because people are like, Hillary, how did you get Washington where it is? Right. And I'll just start, this kind of a personal thing. I'm a really competitive person. That's what happens when you spend 13 years on the ice with Tanya Harding, over 6 days a week for 365 days of the year, 4 hours a day. You just get it instilled in your DNA, right? You've got to fall like thousands and thousands of times.
If you've lived on the West Coast for any length of time, you've seen it. The orange and black skies, the air that makes your throat burn. Your eyes sting as you draw comparisons to the apocalypse or the smog of Beijing. The creeping fear that the fire is coming, your family and home are in peril, and no one can stop it. A lot of people avoid working on climate because it feels too big. The fires, the floods, the storms, the bureaucracy. Acts of God out of human control, some say, looking past human responsibility for those problems. It's overwhelming. And when Washington, D.C. drags its feet or buries its head in the sand, enacting a political performance that plays to how people fear a problem they perceive as beyond control, well, it's easy to believe that nothing can be done. But what if that's just not true? In Washington state, things started to change thanks to a former conservation lawyer who also spent 13 years on the ice with Tanya Harding. Yes, that Tanya Harding. The Olympian, whose breathtaking athleticism was overshadowed by scandal, a crowbar to the knee of her rival. But before the controversy, Harding trained like hell, and so did Hilary Franz. 4 hours a day, every day, for over a decade. And it turns out when you've trained yourself to fall and get back up over and over and over again, you're ready for politics and wildfires and building a state-level response to climate change that doesn't wait around for federal permission. Hilary Franz served as Washington's Commissioner of Public Lands for 8 years. She managed 6 million acres of public land, led wildfire response for the state, and helped reimagine how governments, rural and urban, red and blue, could work together when the skies are burning. Now, it feels like it could be tempting to say anyone's won a battle with climate change, but Hilary's example suggests something just as powerful, that we can build resilience and adaptability at scale and under pressure, even as climate disruption intensifies. And here's the thing. Doing that means looking past the partisan hot takes. Maybe we can protect forests to filter carbon from the atmosphere. Maybe we can thin forests in ways that make them healthier and more fire resistant. Maybe we can preserve wondrous natural landscapes and maintain access to them for recreation. Maybe we can support rural industries that tap our natural resources responsibly and help those communities thrive. Maybe we can harvest good ideas regardless of the source, and when we do, we prove to ourselves that we can tackle the next hard problem. Here, together. Welcome to Pacific Time, the podcast about bold experiments and hard questions from the left coast of America. I'm Greg Ammerfell, and today, what happens when you take a triple axle mindset and aim it at climate resilience? Let's start this interview by getting to know Hilary Franz, starting with the path she traveled from conservation attorney to statewide leader and internationally recognized climate thinker. Among other things, we're going to explore how pickleball could save the world.
Gosh, it is not one that I had envisioned necessarily or had a straight line to, but I practiced for almost 2 decades as an environmental land use attorney in every corner of the state, working to protect our communities and respond to climate change, and also protect our natural resources and fish and wildlife habitat. And I'll be honest, through 2 decades of work, I felt like it was too slow. I was realizing that we had to go faster. We were not keeping up with sort of the pace and scale of the challenges we were facing. And so I thought, gosh, maybe if I served in public office, ran for office, I would have a better ability to accelerate the work rather than just fighting it out, duking it out in court. And my question, I think, was answered with a resounding absolutely. Far more effective, far more long-term results and impacts and change.
And what are you up to these days?
To be determined. No, it's funny. I realized after 8 years of going 24/7 on some really big, hairy, audacious goals and implementation of plan and resources, I was a little exhausted and burned out. So I was going to take a 3-month sabbatical, which got shortened into 3 weeks. And so I've been on sort of 2 to 3 months on a speaking circuit, frankly, all over the country, but all over the world in a way, too. Over in Europe, speaking on an international wildfire conference. And then also really just working with a bunch of diverse people working at the intersection change and wildfire and forest restoration to be able to take with lessons I've learned and start to bring it to other states and even hopefully the country and other countries.
How do you like your vantage point being out of office?
I will tell you I sleep better, although wildfire season is upon us already and it's looking pretty tough. And I know have sleepless nights as I think about my own firefighters, as well as so many of our other states and federal agency firefighters, and that sleeping better. I have a little more time to actually take care of myself. I am not good at self-care. I was like, no, we've got the world to take care of first. And so I'm actually finding a better balance. I also, 8 years it was an amazing 8 years and did an enormous amount and felt like that time is finite and I can't waste a minute in driving change and results. And at the same time, I definitely neglected time with the people that matter most in my life. So my 3 sons, I am now like just 2 days ago, I was in my weekly pickleball game with my son at Green Lake. I've gotten to do 2 weeks in Europe with my youngest, who's in college. So really focusing on actually rebuilding and investing in relationships from family and friends. So.
Have you ever seen a more diverse scene anywhere? Like, it's so cool how it brings people together. I feel like the world would be better with more pickleball.
I completely agree. It's interesting that because of the conversation we're going to have in a few minutes, but you're right when you think about like we have become more and more, at the local level, the state level, federal level, right, more isolated into our own like think bubbles and, community bubbles. And the interesting thing about pickleball, when you go to these parks, first it's packed. I mean, it is packed, standing room only, right? And people waiting in line. There's a structure and system so that everybody gets an equal chance in. You could go as a solo, not even have a partner, and you are paired just automatically with whatever is happening in that line and have multiple different partners that are on your team, successful or not, but you build relationship that way. And I'm thinking, God, can you imagine if we did that for more of our problem solving on all different issues? Of like, we're just going to go to the pickleball court and today we're going to solve housing. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a diversity of people from, that have thought about it or had experienced it. Pick your partner.
Pickleball diplomacy. I love it. Let's make it happen.
Okay.
You mentioned having easier time sleeping at night, which leads to this question. What keeps you at night more? Fire, water, misinformation, or constitutional crisis?
Oh, I would say fire. Well, first, it's because what I've experienced, for 8 years, right? 2, yeah, the risk of life is so imminent and clear. Like all those other topics have clear risks to life, right? But the clarity of it, right? The clarity of any one individual act or failure to act isn't as clear. I will say also having led wildfire for the state of Washington for 8 years, where at any given year I'll have 3,000 to 4,000 firefighters who are putting their lives on the line. They are the age of my sons, all the way up to the number of families who are at risk. As somebody who tragically lost a little boy's life in the Labor Day firestorm of 2020, where the young family tried to outrun the Coal Creek fire and the parents were able to survive, but the little boy didn't. You wear that. You wear it not only of like, what could I have done different, how could we have been more prepared? How could we have thought about this a decade earlier to know what was likely to happen and to start to already seed those investments? And then you're also looking forward going, how do we make sure it never, ever happens again? And the hard part is some of it is completely out of your control. And at the same time, a lot of it is in your control.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a heart-wrenching story about the family losing their son. Let's shift into talking about wildfire. I want to get your perspective on kind of the federal situation as well, but we'll come back to that. Let's first situate this conversation. We're talking a few months after the tragic Palisades and Altadena fires in Southern California, which are only the latest examples of a crisis that's been brewing on the West Coast, in my mind, for years. So what do we in Washington and on the greater West Coast get right and wrong about wildfire?
First, a lot has changed since a decade ago when, Washington State had 1.1 million acres burned. And it frankly was our wake-up call. A lot has changed just in the last 5 years, and not just for Washington, but for the entire United States, but very much so the West Coast. Part of, I think, the biggest thing that has changed is actually an awareness, just a general fundamental awareness that wildfires are here. It is no longer an anomaly. It isn't like, oh, yeah, we're going to probably have one bad fire season a decade. It is now clearly known that we're going to have a bad wildfire season every single year. And the anomaly would be when we don't have very many wildfires. Like 2019 was the only anomaly we had in my 8 years. Another big awareness we have is no one is immune from these wildfires. People can really no longer stop, they can no longer really ignore it or pretend it won't happen. The west side of Washington State, because in 2023, we had more wildfires west of the Cascades than east of the Cascades for the first time in recorded history. We can no longer think it's not going to happen in our state, that it's not going to happen in our community or our backyard. I think that has been a significant shift. I think the other big shift that's happening is that states are realizing that where they might have looked to the federal government for so the natural disaster response resources, which is how historically wildfires were supported, funded, and fought, that is no longer the case. That states, Washington, Oregon, and California for sure are catching on and have been catching on, for the last decade. But now you see Texas, you see Oklahoma, Minnesota right now, right? My son lives in New York City and he's like, Mom, when the Brooklyn fires, just I go, right? These are all massive shifts that are happening at the state level. And, and I would say I look at that in a positive way, I guess, is the context that the good news is people are waking up and realizing that no one is immune from these wildfires and that everyone has a responsibility to be part of the solution. It's interesting. I've been having this conversation a lot because people are like, Hilary, how did you get Washington where it is, right? And I'll just start, this kind of a personal thing. I'm a really competitive person. That's what happens when you spend 13 years on the ice with Tanya Harding, for 6 days a week for 365 days of the year, 4 hours a day. You just get it instilled in your DNA, right?
Wait a second. You ice skated with Tanya Harding for all those years?
I did. 13 years, 4 hours a day, 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. And there's actually a really great motto in there about leadership. Well, there's two mottos I have. One's on politics and one's on leadership. The motto one is always avoid the crowbar and carry a blade. That's how you're going to survive politics. That's how you're going to survive ice skating. That's how you're going to survive wildfires, right? The larger motto, whether it's a motto or a value, I didn't really realize actually until I got into a leadership role, a significant leadership role of leading an agency and in ice skating, right? To land a triple, you've got to fall like thousands and thousands of times. Like every morning for 4 hours a day, I got up and fell on my ass for 4 hours. I just perfected the art of falling on my ass. Okay? Nobody does that, right? But the whole time I didn't go, oh my God, I just fell on my ass. I said, oh my God, I am one more jump closer to landing that triple. And you looked at falling down as actually a positive of helping you actually achieve rather than something that helped you fail. And that was so significant for me to then take into a government role, right? In 2017, when I stepped into this role of Commissioner of Public Lands and the fire chief for our state was actually really at ground zero of understanding the significance of the wildfire crisis, the magnitude of it. It made us have to really look at what we had been doing and hadn't been doing. And I went and said to folks, because this is just to ground people, 2014 and 2015, we had a total, well, there's 1.1 million acres burned in 2015 and 800,000 acres burned in 2040. Two of our largest, worst number of fire, magnitude since, right? And even before, right? And I challenged my people. I was like, the competitive person, like, okay, we're going to be number one in the country in wildfire response. So I said, who's our closest competitor? And they're like, Cal Fire. And I go, great, we're going to be. And they're like, no, you can't beat Cal Fire. I mean, California's economy is so big, right? It's like sixth largest country in economy. Cal Fire has been around since the 1930s. They built this system over decades and decades that has gotten them to be this true, I think, significant wildfire fighting force that sure has still lessons to learn, but is actually a model for this country. It's a model for the world. And there is no way we could build that overnight in 4 years, 8 years, right? So I said, okay, fine, who's number two, right? and that then became the model of like setting a big goal of how we were going to turn the tide from where we were. And to ground you, we had only 40 full-time firefighters for the entire state. We had only 8 Vietnam War era Hueys to fight fires. We had zero in our budget every single year to invest just in wildfire resources, from the radios and communications to the infrastructure to the equipment to the people. So we literally were starting at ground zero. In addition to that, we did not have any resources for actually addressing why we were having such catastrophic wildfires, right? I mean, we are the evergreen state. We have millions and millions of acres of forests, and our forests are dying, especially in central and eastern Washington. And half of that is like federal lands, and then there's private, state, and tribal. We had no forest health program. We didn't have anyone to do that work, right? So we were literally starting at ground zero. And I think we pose a really great model for other countries and other states that are now facing this issue, but don't necessarily have the resources like the state of California, because we have gone in just a short amount of time to actually on the trajectory of achieving our goals. So our goal was to be able to keep 90% of our fires below 10 acres. And it was also to not just be reacting to fires, but to restore 1.25 million acres of forest in central and eastern Washington in 20 years. And over the last 4 years, even as we've seen more fires in every corner of the state and more geography of fighting these fires, we've kept 95% of our fires below 10 acres for the last 4 years. The number of acres burned is down to the level that was back in the early 2000s, and most states can't say that. And then on top of it, our forest health goal of 1.25 million acres, we are just about 1 million acres in 7 years. So we will achieve, if we keep on this pace, we will achieve our 20-year plan and goal in 10 years. So huge amount of work went into that, but it's a success model. And now the key is that we can't get complacent, right? And that's what oftentimes happens in government, and in our communities. We get complacent. We're like, oh, we haven't had smoke fill the skies for the last 4 years. We must be lucky, must be out of the woods and no longer have wildfires. And I say it wasn't luck. It was actually leadership, the investments that we've been making on the ground and in the air, the investments our legislature stepping up, the investments of the broad coalition of local, state, and federal coming together on an all lands, all hands. But we are not out of the woods, and we still have a lot of work to go, and especially on the west side of the state, and especially in building that awareness for the community of their own responsibility at preparing and preventing these fires.
Thank you for the context. You've equipped me with a really useful metaphor when you talk about avoiding the crowbar and wielding a switchblade. I think of that as being prepared and being responsive. And you've also highlighted something else that keeps coming up in conversations, by the way, this idea of government and society being more willing to take risk and fail and learn quickly and then act, right? So I appreciate that. We'll be right back. This episode of Pacific Time is supported by Share It Records, an independent label that amplifies artists who still believe music can move people and maybe even change things. Today's featured band is Queen Anne, a West Coast trio making cinematic slow burn rock that hits like a sharp memory emerging from a dense fog. If you love moody anthems and songs that don't rush the payoff, Queen Anne is for you. Listen all the way to the end of this interview for a special treat, Queen Anne's single, Real Enough. As part of Share It's mission, a portion of all Queen Anne proceeds goes to support Malaria Consortium US. Sure good to see people committed to addressing global health challenges. You can find Queen Anne streaming wherever you listen and head to shareitmusic.org to support music that cares about community. Back to the show. Could you bring us up to speed on where we're at with both prevention and response? And Hilary, warts and all, like, where did your department get it wrong? How did you respond to those kinds of lessons?
Yeah, let me start kind of just picking up on one of the notes, right? So when I came in, again, I've been in the practice of law. I have not been in government, right? And I came in and what I really felt like is there's a context of fear of taking risks in government, right? At all levels, from the very, very top to the why? Because if you go and make a decision and that decision does not result in what you had hoped, you end up on the front page of the newspaper and you end up with enormous amount of backlash and vitriol and at all levels, right? All you have to do is open your local news, open your national news, right? And what that does is that does not propel people forward to take more risk, to try new things, to be innovative, to think out of the box, all things that we need to be doing more than ever to tackle our biggest crises, from climate change and wildfire to housing and mental health. I realized really quickly that I had to really sort of help support and empower people within the agency to take risk. And my message was always, look, if you're standing still, you're failing yourself, you're failing your agency and the people, your colleagues, you're failing the state, and you're failing the future we're trying to create for our children. You're going to take a step forward. You are going to fall down. Right? And we're going to be here. I'm going to be here to have your back and say, boy, did we just learn a lesson? And here's what we learned from it. And now we're going to change things and only get better. And the same is for me as a leader, I needed to have humility. I made mistakes. I needed to have humility in front of my people. And I needed to have humility in front of the public, right? And I think that's where we're needing more of it, of that safety and support for our public servants to be able to take risks, to try new things, to think out of the box and say, yeah, you're probably going to make mistakes. Business does all the time.
I think you just defined parenting.
Parents do all the time, right? And you know what? So does government, especially when it's doing hard things, right? That there is no quick cheat sheet book to follow. So that's the first thing. And empowering that and creating a culture within your organization and agency, which does take time to do that. I think then what have we gotten right? I think that was your question. And what is left to be done is kind of where, I could say what have we gotten wrong for sure, but I think it's really about where we need to continue to go, right? So first, in Washington State, we have made significant, I'll just start with, I have the three buckets. I call them the three legs of the stool of how we're going to address our wildfire crisis. And first is on the wildfire, recognizing we didn't have any resources, no funding. Our agency brand name was called DNR, Do Not Respond, Do Not Resuscitate, after the 2014 through 2016 fires. It wasn't representative of the people, their passion, their determination, their commitment and care for the community, but it was because they didn't have resources. They didn't have the tools they needed, right? And so immediately we got to work with just one setting a goal. And I think government needs to set big, hairy, audacious goals because the times we're in demand it, right? From environment and social and economic. And then saying, set that goal, and we're now going to build and develop plans and strategies to drive to that, which then gives the public and legislators and Congress, right, a roadmap of if they invest and if they help, we will achieve this together. And we did that. We did it on wildfire response. And we began immediately removing the barriers to initial attack so that within 15 to 30 minutes, you would have air resources, ground resources, or both on a fire at any place that that fire starts within the state of Washington. We moved, part of what we learned, I will say, I guess this is maybe a lesson learned in Labor Day Firestorm 2020. We had 80 fires in 72 hours. We had 600,000 acres burn. We had hurricane force winds, hot, dry conditions, and it was Labor Day 2020. So everybody was out of their COVID, imprisonment and out on the landscape. So more fire starts. And we had the perfect, horrific cocktail for, deadly wildfires. A small town burned down. As I said, we lost my first civilian on my watch. And we were begging for resources. We were begging for ground resources, firefighters all over. We went, which goes up to a request at the federal level, right? We were begging for air resources. And we kept being told, we're sorry, we have none available. You don't have enough values at risk. Values at risk, it's a terrible word, to be honest, right? It's this context that when all hell is breaking loose in natural disasters, people who are in the position of doing emergency response and management are having to make decisions about where to put resources based on how many lives are at risk of being lost. Washington State's fires were not in areas with as densely populated as California and Oregon, which was on fire at the same time. If you just look at the fires up and down that coast, it was brutal, and it was 72 hours of just unbelievable chaos. And obviously those fires continued past the 72 hours. But I don't think our country has ever actually seen something like that in the wildfire natural disaster space. I, in 2021, said, I will never do that again. My job, at the end of the day, I from Oregon, born and raised there. I care about Oregon. I care about California. I care about every state in this country and everybody who is in our country. But my job at the end of the day was to take care of the people of Washington State. And I said, we will never, ever be solely dependent and rely that those resources will be there on the ground and in the air. And so we rapidly changed. I pushed for changing the way we contract our air resources to exclusive use, which has been one of the most massive game changers for Washington State. And now other states are following along, which means that we control those air resources when we need them, because most of them are all contractors with private entities. When we need them, we have them. When we don't, we loan them out. We make the money back. So we send them to the Texas Panhandle. We've sent them to California, Oregon, Montana, Idaho, Alaska, even BC, right? But when we need them, they're there for us. We also broke down a lot of the barriers that happens between, that just is time, because time is everything. We've invested in new technologies like Pano AI cameras that are real-time detecting where the fire starts and when, and the longitude and latitude, so we can get there quicker. Because before, sometimes we had guys walking 3 miles to find a fire. And I'm just going to tell you, he's younger than me, but it still takes time to walk 3 miles to find a fire, right? And then we've also, on the forest restoration side, really, we built up a program to first be able to assess millions and millions of acres really, really fast about what is the condition of those forests and what are the treatments necessary. We then went and worked with the federal government in my first 3 months to sign the Good Neighbor Authority, which enables us to do the work on federal lands. If we're already there, our state lands are adjacent, let us be able to bring the resources and expertise and experience we have to rapidly scale that work up on federal lands, which has been a game changer. Honestly, it's enabled us to go faster. We can do bigger projects too, so we're not doing 100 and 200 acre chunks, but instead 4,000 to 10,000 acre restoration, which is really the scale we need to be working at. And then the community resilience. We've really sort of made a recognition that historically we're the wildfire response. We come in, we put out the wildfire, we get out. And we weren't really looking at the proactive side of the forest restoration and management responsibility across all lands, all hands, like our fire response. And we weren't looking at it from this responsibility of keeping communities safe. It felt like, oh, that's local fire districts, or that's state mobilization, or it's local counties and cities. And we really have, moved our agency to saying, no, we have to be bringing that broader lens of how we help drive resources down to these communities to be able to make their homes, their neighborhoods more resilient. And then I think the big piece that I just add to that is after the 2020 fires, we were able to pass, unanimously, right? As I say, nothing happens unanimously in government anymore. And we were able to pass unanimously a $500 million investment in wildfire response, forest restoration, and community resilience. I wrote that bill. It is now in law. It's 40-some pages of really sort of laying out the larger architect and plan that we need to be going if we're really going to ensure Washington is prepared for the wildfires in front of us.
Yeah. Wow. Congratulations on that. It seems like whenever we come up against a crisis, the answer in government is almost always we need a huge investment. And that is often true. But it strikes me that you and DNR were incredibly scrappy in order to, and strategic to kind of get the right resources and response plans in place.
I think one of the things I've learned that probably needs to happen at all scales of government is first, when your agency is known as do not respond, do not resuscitate, and doesn't have a good brand coming in, this right when I came in 2017, again, not based on the people there and their commitment and determination and compassion, but based just on classic politics, right? And that we weren't prepared for 2014 and 2015. And there's a lot of responsibility that lays with, but it was a wake-up call. Who would have known, right, that it would be that bad, that fast? And I think really what I realized is I wasn't going to get any money with that brand. So what I had to do is quickly change it. And the way you change it is you leverage initial attack. The moment smoke is in the air, you're going to show, even with only 8 Vietnam War helicopters, right? You're on them. You're going to pre-position them. You're going to do everything to cut that time down. And we did that. And that within 1 year, people on the ground in the local communities, from the fire chiefs to the local government leaders to the community members to legislators, are like, oh, new day in Washington State on wildfire. They're taking charge and they're showing they're worth investing. The second thing is we actually really dove in and brought a broad stakeholder group of people in to help really understand what the problem is and set a strategic plan, a 10-year wildfire strategic plan and a 20-year forest health plan. And we didn't do it in a silo, oh, we'll just do it ourselves. We brought in the diverse voices, people who didn't always get along, people who might not get along with our agency or have issues, brought them in and said, help us design the future that we want to have and should have. That then laid out the roadmap. And I then walked to the legislature and said, I'm not just asking for a blank check. What I'm asking for is, if you invest in these strategies, we will deliver those results and you will see a difference and you will see the accountability and transparency of those investments that it is worth continuing to invest in. And when we passed House Bill 1168, that $500 million, the first thing I did is I said to my folks, we're building a tracker. We're going to build a tracker that shows how much money we are getting, where that money is going, how it's being invested, and then the results on the ground. And that has then been able to show people true accountability and transparency. And when you think about fire, I guess one of the biggest messages, it is, that saying we heard as children, which we always kind of wondered, like, what it is. Oh my God, they're just trying to make me take my medicine or eat my vegetables, right? Which is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? That all went over our heads as kids. I'm going to tell you, that is the most significant, sort of revelation for me in the context of wildfire. The ounce of prevention in forest management and stewardship and restoring the health of forests is worth the pound of cure, right? It's the ounce of prevention and having those resources for wildfire up front so you're not begging, borrowing, and steal at the last minute and you can't get on them quickly and contain them is worth a pound of cure. and all the destruction that happens. And the same is true of homeowners taking action to make their homes more resilient to fire, which they can do, is worth the pound of cost that it's going to. And I think Oregon is seeing this right now. I mean, Oregon last year had almost 2 million acres burn, about 1.9 million acres, and we had 300,000 acres. And we had roughly the same number of fires, same weather conditions. And it was because we came up front and massively invested in the resources we needed in wildfire response to really be on those fires quickly to prevent the destruction and damage.
On one hand, what's running in my head is the cartoonish portrayal of people in government as being ineffectual and wasteful and all these things. And it's hearing you talk about a very thoughtful, very measured, very scrappy and resourceful approach that led to legislation and the resources and support you need to scale up. I feel like we need to hear more and more of these stories, because it turns out there are a lot of smart and well-intentioned people working in government, not just you, everyone you worked with and people you worked around. So that's really impressive. But two, it's funny, having grown up on the West Coast, I just sort of take wildfire for granted. So it was interesting to hear you kind of take me into history and talk about 2020. To me, all the wildfires just kind of blend together, and you're highlighting that was one particularly bad year, but also a particularly bad year that doesn't have to be our destiny. What you're highlighting is that a bunch of smart action, we're not going to be able to prevent all fires. They're going to happen. These are natural disasters. They are acts of God. But the idea that we're unable to affect the outcome is also untrue. And the contrast you just described between Oregon and Washington, I think, is really interesting and is a story that more people need to know about.
I mean, there's a lot in the world of environment and climate change that feels very much out of our ability to effectuate and change. What I look at the context of wildfire and the crisis that is playing out, and first very much played out on the West Coast, and is now, as we've seen in just the last 4 years, is moving state by state by state. Yeah, I think it's a place for hope, because it is something that not only did I think we could effectuate change and make a significant difference, I actually think we are proving it. And when I say we, I don't mean just Washington. I think we can see real examples, California, Washington, Oregon, Colorado. I mean, the list goes on, Texas, of real on the ground change that is occurring, that is reducing these catastrophic wildfires and their damage, that is also increasing the pace and scale of support for our forests, because they should be able to fight these fires on their own if they're healthy. So we're actually saying we took those forests for granted. We didn't actually invest in them. We just left them on their own devices, which is kind of what we did with our federal forest lands, right? And even some of our state lands, right? And we're now realizing, oh, no. You can't just neglect and just set them aside and think they're going to be okay, because they are crying out, telling us we are not okay. We are very, very sick, and we're getting sicker. And it doesn't just apply to, in Washington, the central eastern part of the state. The reason Washington state is solid red for fire risk this coming July and August is the west side of our state is seeing those hotter, drier temperatures. But it's also because we haven't gone in and steward and managed these forests in a way that actually keeps them healthy for the long term.
Let's come back to that. I'm really eager to hear your perspective on what a healthy forest means. But part of my point on kind of looking back at the 2020 fires in a region where we just sort of expect fires are happening all the time, how could a citizen who's not steeped in the details of fire response and management, how could they know that we're making progress? How could they know that we're not just, going to be perpetual victims of climate change?
Okay, do you live in Washington state?
I do.
Okay. When do you remember your skies filled with smoke?
About 7 or 8 years ago, it felt like I came back from a trip to Europe, and the skies felt like what I'd heard people describe Beijing.
Okay, so that was, I think, 2018.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that year. I remember everyone. And then I don't know where you were in 2020, because it was like COVID, but 2020 and 2018 were the 2 years that we had the worst air quality in the world from Spokane to Seattle. So we beat Beijing on that horrific data point. Now, 2018, we had some bad fires. We had 1,850 fires that year. We had some bad fires. We did not have We still only had like 8 Vietnam War helicopters. And we only had 40 firefighters, right? So we didn't have any of the resources. And I had been like, I think it was my second fire season, right? So we were just getting started. Part of that year also, the smoke you experienced was from BC and California and Oregon, right? So it loved to just come and hang out in Washington State. 2020, we own all of that smoke. That was our smoke with 600,000 acres burning in 72 hours and all hell breaking out and all hands on deck. I don't think Oregon would say the same thing, and maybe not even California would say the same thing you just said of, I don't remember smoke for like 7 to 8 years. That is the most clear statement of success because our number of fires have been still growing and increasing. The location and geography of these fires have been increasing. I think you're on the west side of the state, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so Eastern Washington they've been socked in smoke for a long time, decade plus, right? West side, it's new to them, but we're having more fires on the west side, so they're experiencing more smoke. The fact that you're not knowing that and would probably think that our number of fires is down and the geography is down. And also that Eastern Washington was like, wow, I got my summer back last year. I got my summer back the year before. So 2022, 23, 24, they got their summer back. That is the hope, right? That is the beauty that we are making progress. It is because of the investments that we've made on the ground in more firefighters, 160, and also expanding our seasonal, investing in our local fire districts. So we're building a broader bench and team. The investment we made in air resources, we had 44 last year. 44 air resources under our control, the most we've ever had, right? And that's up from, like I said, the 8 we had in 2017. That's not going to cover a big state. We're using those new technologies, so we're identifying the Pano AI cameras, identify them quicker. We now also are using drones for being able to fight fires with us and do the back burning for better safety for our teams. So all that is playing out. I also think that the forest health work that we're doing on all lands from federal, state, and tribal and private, we're not yet out of the woods. We still have a long ways to go, but it is reducing. And I've seen it with my own eyes, a fire that came through where an area was treated, and it slowed that fire down significantly, the prescribed fire coming in there. And so that's where the hope is. Now I'm going to tell you what my biggest fear is, okay? Because I just gave you sunshine, unicorns, and rainbows, right? My biggest fear is that our success in Washington State is now breeding a false sense of security. I hear it. I hear it every year. They're like, wow, we got lucky this year. Did you see Oregon last year? We didn't have any fires this year. Like, no, we had fires. We had a lot of fires, right? We just got on them quickly and we contained them and we put them out, right? So that we can give the forests and our work time to get them restored. And we can give our communities time to get their communities more resilient. My fear is that people now have a false sense of security. So one, that means that you're going to see an increase in the number of fires that are started by humans because they're like, oh, I don't have to think about fires anymore, right? Smoky is out of mind, out of sight. And the smoke too, right? And actually, if you looked at Oregon and Washington State was really failing last year because most of Oregon's fires were more lightning nature caused. Ours were more human caused. So we have a lot of work to do in that area of prevention. The second is that people aren't going to be doing the work they need to do in their communities and their neighborhoods, right? They're going to think, oh, we don't have fires anymore. I don't have to worry about doing that community resilience work of hardening my home, hardening my neighborhood, getting those fuel breaks in. And that is a really bad thing because this is the time we need. We're buying people time as we do this work of rapid response on wildfires to get their properties more resilient, their homes. We also need the continued investment in this forest restoration, and we especially need it on the west side of the state. We haven't even touched the ground really in the forest health work that is needed on the west side of the state. And I'll to be honest, in part, legislature, Congress, state, governments, local, state, and federal governments, they invest based on the crisis du jour, right? What's the crisis of the day? We've got to put resources to it. It makes complete sense. And I think there's this false sense that we don't have a fire crisis anymore because Washington State has really dropped the numbers of acres burned and the risk. So now we can change our focus and pivot to other areas that also are critical and necessary. The problem that creates is, again, ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure. You're going to have a very huge problem of more wildfires in more populated areas, meaning more lives lost and more damage and cost of fighting those fires and then being able to rebuild afterwards. We need more people to really realize we're not out of the woods. We're just barely starting.
So while we're on the subject of the woods, what do you have to say in your 20-year forest health strategic plan? And by the way, I found it so refreshing to see that entitled "Start with 20 years," because you just don't see that from government, like something that long term. What is that plan about? What would a healthy forest in the Northwest look like?
Yeah. And let me just say, what's so great about the 20-year? And here's another, I'll just start from the 2020 so you know this. So we put out the 20-year. I did that my first 8 months in 2017. And first people are like, oh my gosh, Hilary, don't set a big goal. We don't have any staff. We don't have any research. I'm like, we need to be led more by what needs to happen than what we think we're capable of. Because we will rise to it. Just like we sent astronauts to the moon, set the vision of what needs to happen, and then we work our way to there. Because I believe anything's achievable, truly. When we set that goal, what Labor Day firestorm, when that happened and a town burned down and 100,000 acres burned in 5 hours, I was like, we have to double down. That 20-year goal needs to be a 10-year goal. And immediately my people were like, what? And I go, we don't have time to waste. We have to work at the pace and scale of wildfire to give our forests a chance. And so that they can fight these fires with us, join our fire team, really. I think the first thing that I would say on the forest health plan, which is oftentimes what people miss, is that in a very divided, tumultuous, turbulent world we're in right now, where nobody seems to be really getting along or working across divides, whether it's political divides, ideological divides, rural-urban divide, that forest health plan does that. That forest health plan brought together people, and maybe that was really good that, I'm brand new and I didn't know who hated everybody else and I didn't know their drama from the past, but I was like, you're all going to get in the room and we're going to fix this, right? The great thing is you have the most diverse organizations from the most diverse ideological backgrounds and building a plan that has its foundation as science. Foundation is science, which must lead us or we will not actually solve this problem. And setting the goal and then developing the strategies and tools to get there. And then that work has enabled us actually to get the kind of funding we need because we work in Olympia to get the support and the funding for it. So specifically what that did is it sort of takes an all lands approach. It says if Washington State if my agency just focused on our 2 million acres of forest land and 1 million acres agricultural land, we're not going to solve this wildfire crisis. Like we could restore the health of those landscapes, but there's still, federal lands is over 6 million acres. You've got just a forest land. You've got over 8 million acres of private forest land. Then there's, millions of acres of tribal lands. And so it really said we need to take the same approach we do in wildfire of all hands, all lands. We're going to solve this together. So it really doesn't follow jurisdictional boundaries because wildfire and disease don't. It recognizes that we had, and it's about 3 million acres of forest in central and eastern Washington that are dead and dying. It's a result of drought, it's disease, insect infestation. You have too many trees that are all fighting for sun, water, nutrients, right? That need more space and gaps. And that actually, if you look back 100 years, we didn't have as much density of trees in central and eastern Washington that we do now. And if we could bring back, that's because fire would come through. It would remove the weaker trees, create more space. It would also provide that kind of carbon-rich nutrients that the soil and the trees need. And we really needed to look back at what the ecology was of a healthy forest, but also recognize that climate change is really changing these forests, right? It's changing it from water, but it's also what seedlings or types of trees are going to adapt better to a hotter, warmer climate. So that was the foundation of how do we assess all of these acres of forest land and then specifically set what kind of treatment needs to happen on those lands. And then put in an adaptive management model where you're going back and go, did we get it right? Did we not? I mean, sometimes we don't get it right. Like we might say, I remember one of my first sort of very challenging forest health treatment right in the beautiful Methow Valley where people really care about their trees, they care about their landscape and the environment. And there was a debate going between scientists, right? No, it should be 30 trees per acre. No, it should be 130 trees per acre. Well, we got in, we split the baby like roughly around 60, 70 trees per acre. Nature came in right after we did that forest health treatment with a wildfire and got it to what it really should be, right? But without all the destruction because you didn't have all the fuel. And then we've been marshaling the resources to that work on getting funding from the legislature, but we create revolving loan funds so that actually when we make money on those projects, it goes into an account. So that way if state budgets drop or federal budgets drop, we still have those resources because you can't plan this kind of restoration work if you're every single year don't know if you're going to have any money.
Let me clarify. So when you make money on a project, does that mean that in thinning the forest, there's actually timber getting sold? And so that it's kind of this win-win of a healthier forest and economic stimulus in that area?
It's exactly like that, right? And it's so, and I'll give you some other eye-openers of being, in governance. When we developed that 20-year forest health plan, right? There had been a long-standing debate of how do we get more investments in mills, more investments in mass timber, which is taking small diameter wood and turns it into a sustainable wood product that enables you to go in taller buildings, like 18-story buildings, like right here in Seattle, the first affordable housing mass timber project has been built, right? It's pretty beautiful and amazing. It also helps you go up quicker and faster. And if you think about housing, we need to go quicker and faster in building it. And everybody's like, well, how do we get this moving? How do we get more CLT being? Well, we'd had that debate forever. It's the building codes. No, people just need to invest. No, we need to do the treatment. When we developed that forest health plan, it sent a message to the marketplace that if you're interested in investing in big manufacturing of a mass timber or a mill or a biomass biochar facility, it's $150 million of investment. No one's going to be able to get that kind of funding investment unless they know they're going to have the wood product to be able to create that product, whether it is mass timber, whether it's 2x4s, whether it's biochar or biomass. And what that forest health plan said is we're committed over 20 years to restoring 1.25 million acres on federal, state, private, and tribal lands. And anybody could do that general calculation then of, okay, this is how much volume I'm going to have, how many board feet, how much waste material, right, for them then to go to the investors. And sometimes the investors, usually it's a mixture of like, obviously, capital and equity, but it's also government oftentimes making grants like USDA grants. That gives them the ability to say there is certainty or reducing a significant amount of the risk. And so as a result, within literally a year and a half, 2 mass timber facilities had opened up in Washington State, opened up, not just cut a ribbon, not just broke ground, but had opened up in communities that have had 7 to 12% unemployment, like in the Colville area where Vaughan Timbers is. And it's still going today. It's thriving and it's expanding that use of mass timber internationally. Mercer is in Spokane. We now just last year broke ground in Port Angeles on a biochar facility, which, I think biochar is the black gold of the future because all those have you ever seen those slash piles?
No.
So when you do a forest health treatment, or even a timber sale, you're going to see massive slash piles. They're huge, right? And it's the material that you can't do anything with, the root balls and the branches and the limbs, right? And so what happens is we burn it. And the reason we burn it is if we don't burn it, nature's going to hit it with lightning or something else. And now we've created a pretty significant fire risk. When we burn it, we're just burning that carbon, greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. To me, it is the biggest waste to the environment, but also waste to the economy. And the waste to the environment is not only the greenhouse gas emissions that are going, but it's also the fact that that product would be amazing carbon if it was put in a kiln, like a biochar facility, where you take the gas and you put it on the grid and it powers, in the case of the one in Port Angeles, it'll power 13,000 homes. You're then left with this char that is like, it actually seals and cements that carbon in. Now you put it out on your forest lands. You don't need as much water. You put it on your agricultural lands. You need less fertilizers, pesticides. You also need less water, and you get greater production. Believe it or not, cows. Yeah, everybody criticizes cows, and my grandfather was a rancher. Because of the methane. I had no idea, but this is so amazing. Cows, when they eat it, reduce like their methane emissions by 30%. And cows love eating it, right? It's like a win-win-win, right? And here's the win on the house. Like on this, housing is our biggest social crisis in Washington State. Maybe I think in America, because it's so destabilizing for kids, for education, for the workforce, for mental health and addiction and other issues, right? It is our biggest social crisis. Well, the beauty is mass timber, you take that material that was going to burn up in a wildfire or was just going to slash piles because it couldn't be made into the 254s. Now it provides the most sustainable built supply, as well as something that can go up really affordable and really quick for meeting our housing crisis.
I am, from this point forward, whenever someone tries to suggest that government is not on the side of the economy, I'm going to just play this section of our conversation, and hopefully your exuberance about that relationship and the interplay between them comes across.
Can I just add to that, though?
Yeah.
I think it's because it's about the hat government is wearing, right? Government is just wearing a hat. My job is head down. I just got to go put the fire out. I just got to restore the forest. That's my job. And stop. Versus, no, I can't solve any one of those crises without the private sector. It is true that I cannot, in Washington State, succeed in wildfire detection, response, without the private sector, from the aircraft to the equipment to the cameras, you name it. I also cannot restore the state's forests or the federal forest or, without the private sector. The private sector to buy the wood material, to buy the byproduct of it. And that's the context, is we need government. I know that people think, oh, corporations and capital is bad. But if they really looked at themselves and how they meet their daily needs, they would realize that the private sector is so important at solving some of our biggest social, economic, and environmental challenges if we would only invite them in and be part of the solution.
Big thanks to Hilary Franz for joining me. It's not every day you meet a guest who's part firefighter, part policy nerd, part ice skater philosopher. Her story reminds me that resilience isn't just something we talk about, it's something we train for. A few takeaways. 1, wildfire isn't just a rural problem. It's a classic tragedy of the commons, and we're seeing growing evidence that it's urban, it's coastal, it's everyone's business. 2, states don't have to wait for the feds. They can lead, innovate, and coordinate across party lines, across state lines, when the stakes are sky high or smoke thick. No need to delegate our thinking, decision-making, or funding to DC when it's as important as the natural environment we treasure on the West Coast. Let's just ignore the crackpot theories manufactured for scrolling on cable TV news shows that dispute the evidence and our lived reality with climate change. And because I know many of us like a little jalapeno in our salsa and our margaritas, I'm going to keep asking spicy questions. And I'd love your equally spicy answers on Substack, Instagram, or Blue Sky. Here it is. If Washington State can build a playbook for responding to and preventing a problem as big as wildfire, what other climate issues could we tackle? And is tackling housing or homelessness or economic inequality, education or misinformation beyond us? These are all wicked problems for sure. But isn't the West Coast a literal hotbed of ideas and action? Enough spice for today. Thanks for being with me in Pacific Time. If you liked this episode, Share it with a friend. Drop a review wherever you listen and follow us on Substack at Pacific Time Podcast. Join the discussion there, and I'm going to start dropping special treats for subscribers. And hey, if you've made it this far, we've got something special for you. This is the song Real Enough by Queen Anne, a band on the label of our partners at Share It Music. Think haunting harmonies, slow burn bass and guitars, a West Coast ache that, well, feels real enough to hold. Imagine Black Keys and Chappell Roan making music together. And somehow, a badass female-led band seemed appropriate at the end of this episode. Enjoy, and I'll see you soon.
I keep forgetting that you're a person. I guess that's kind of irresponsible. But it's so easy to just romanticize the idealized impossible. You could have told me I'm incidental. That's the kind of thing you don't forget. There's something darker because you're on the brink and I don't think you're over it. But now I'm sinking deeper and I can't escape. It's like a burning building when I look at your face. I think I know what you're doing. I fall asleep. Maybe I'd love to be a secret, but not one you can keep. Funny how you always think you're so tough. Tell me no one's ever suffered this much. Anything I do, you think I screw it up. I could go insane, would that be real enough? Funny how you always think you're so tough. Tell me no one's ever suffered this much. Anything I do, you think I screw it up. I could go insane, would that be real enough? I'm gonna guess that you forgot it too. It must feel so good, believing every living creature is in love with you. But now I'm sinking deeper and I can't escape. It's like a burning building when I look at your face. I think I know what you're doing. I fall asleep. Maybe I'd love to be a secret, but not one you can keep. Funny how you always think you're so tough. Tell me no one's ever suffered this much. Anything I do, you think I screw it up. I could go insane, would that be real enough? Funny how you always think you're so tough. Tell me no one's ever suffered this much. Anything I do, you think I screw it up. I could go insane, would that be real enough?